Hello. So I'm recording this from the other side of the world, but that doesn't mean that I'm not following news back home. Um, Not that I take much pleasure from following news back home because I find most of it depressing, whether it is divisive identity politics, whether it is rising violent crime, or perhaps most prominently Brexit. The news from back in the UK, unfortunately, is not very reassuring. But I want to focus on Brexit for this video. I'll try not to make it too long because the space is limited and I can't actually upload the videos until I get back to the UK. So that'll be about 4 months. Um, yeah, so I've just seen a Sky News video where a woman at a fish and chip shop in Burnley predicted there would be civil war if a hard Brexit was not delivered. Um, there is something that I think is quite obvious. Brexit is a very, very, very complicated business, and it's been very divisive. I've never been shy of saying that I voted Remain, and I have zero regret for doing that. My gut feeling is Brexit was a mistake. But time will tell. Maybe it won't be. I don't know. But one thing that makes me very concerned and something I do not understand is why hard Brexiteers, not just in the political win, but in society, because in a democracy, voters have responsibility as well. So people who voted for leave, but doing so wanting a hard Brexit, because I don't accept that 17 million people all voted with the exact same intention. Yes, they voted to leave the European Union, but I do not believe for a second that 17 million people wanted a hard Brexit with soured relations with our European neighbours. I think 17 million people voted leave because, for a range of reasons, but they wanted out of the European Union. But I think if we're talking about people who really want a hard Brexit, i.e., do two fingers to Brussels, leave with no deal, and you know, leave tomorrow, I think that would be a significantly less number of people. So this notion, the nation has spoken, not really. Yes, the Leave side won, and I'm not disputing that. But what proportion of the Leave side wants a hard Brexit versus a soft Brexit? No one really knows. Now, what I don't understand about the hard leavers is they have this kind of notion of the EU's terrible, it's responsible for all of Britain's problems, and if we leave, everything will be great. And it's all about control, which is a legitimate point of concern. It's a very legitimate reason. There are definitely contentions to be had about the European Union. I am no blind sycophant of the EU. I'm no blind sort of I'm not blind to its faults, put it that way. But can anyone honestly say that much good has come out of this since June 2016? There's been a scattering of good news. We had a trade deal a while back with Australia, but we're close with Australia anyway. It's a Commonwealth country. It's our sister nation. So I don't really see that as particularly significant. I think we would and should have good deals with countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, in or out of the EU. So I can't think of many other things. I've heard Japan is seriously considering its trade relations with the UK, and I'm sure there are others. So I have a bad feeling, and it's not a case of looking at Project Fear, so-called Project Fear. I think, by the way, Project Fear is something that people. It's kind of this meaningless term that is brought about when people don't like to hear another point of view. i.e., all the other side is just trying to scare you. But could it be that the other side is actually just saying something that you don't want to hear? Um, this notion that we leave with no deal is to me incredibly reckless. Time's running out, and if we leave with no deal, I'm no expert on the subject, but I would have thought then we're going to have to renegotiate all trade with all EU member states from scratch. Now, surely that is not practical. That's going to create a period of market instability, of uncertainty in this country, in the UK. I'm not in the UK right now, but it's the idea of leaving with no deal. I think certain hard levers don't care. They're so blinded by the hatred of the EU that they don't really care what the consequences are. I really believe that because that is the attitude that they're showing. And it strikes me as incredibly selfish and reckless. It seems to me their only interest is in doing two fingers to Brussels. Now, from the EU side, they expect the EU negotiators to just basically give us everything that we're asking for. Now, in terms of respecting people wanting to leave, the EU should do that. Otherwise, the claims of it being authoritarian would be valid. But if people expect the EU not to also, look at their interests, they're being gullible, and they're missing the whole point of negotiations. Of course, the EU negotiators are going to be thinking about 27 member states versus one. They shouldn't be making threats, and we shouldn't tolerate that. I think the Prime Minister's tried her level best to be both assertive in not being pushed around by Brussels, but at the same time maintaining that we have good relations with our closest European um, neighbours. What I don't understand about the mentality of hard levers is they insist that they're not, it's about the EU, it's not about Europe, but they're treating the EU like it is our greatest external threat, a greater threat than Russia, a greater threat than Islamist extremism. That's what I don't understand about hard levers. I understand them disliking the EU. I can accept that. There's things I don't even like about the EU. What I don't get is that they really do seem to think that if we leave, it will just solve all our problems. Um, there is a legitimate point to be made about sovereignty, but the point is, leaving immediately with no deal isn't going to protect our sovereignty. It's going to create instability, which, if anything, will weaken the UK. That's how I feel about it. And I'm not the only one. I think there's millions of people, definitely on the Remain side, but also I suspect many people who voted Leave who are uneasy about the way things are going. And, people say the people have spoken, but the majority of people are not hard leavers. So the hard leavers shouldn't have this arrogant idea that they're the only ones whose opinion matters. I accept the result was the way it was. So I'm not calling for another referendum. I'm not calling to stay in the EU. But I do want absolutely good relations with the rest of Europe. And I think there's something seriously wrong with people who don't. That they're being so frankly jingoistic, that they just want to have this grandiose idea of doing two fingers to the EU, leaving and not really caring about the consequences because, oh, we've stood up to them. But what about the future? They haven't, I don't think they thought for a second about the future. They're obsessing over how much they hate the EU. I don't think they're really thinking about what the future is going to hold. They say, oh, we can survive on our own. In the 21st century, in an interconnected world, we no longer have an empire. And the world is a very different place to 1973 when we joined. So I think, the leaders of all the European democracies are never going to allow a situation where relations get so bad that, we can't have any trade. But there is, I fear, going to be a long period of uncertainty. And I do think this has soured relations, and that makes me very sad. With countries like France, the Netherlands, the Republic of Ireland, our closest neighbours. Um, it makes me sad. We should have very strong relations with them because, frankly, in the world today, we of course the Commonwealth is extremely important, but we can't rely on the Commonwealth. Countries like China, we need to do trade with, but there are clear issues with that regarding values, regarding issues like human rights, which are not the same when we're talking about our relations with European neighbours. And there's a very unstable president in the White House. We could have strong trade deals with the United States, but we can't rely on the United States and Commonwealth alone. We need to reach out, and that would mean uh, getting closer to countries like China, which I have hesitations about. So to me, this is turning our back on Europe. They say it's turning our back on the EU. I say this could be turning our back on Europe. I think it's going to damage relations, and I think that's utterly tragic because France, Germany, Sweden, Czech Republic, these are like-minded liberal democracies. We should have very strong relations with them, and they will still be members of the European Union. So you can say that it's about the EU, not Europe, but they will still be in the EU. So we have to have relations with the European Union. And the jingoistic language coming from hard levers is not helping matters. Now, I'm not being totally one sided. There are EU negotiators who have also said unhelpful things. They haven't entirely respected our point of view either. I love my country and I'll always defend the United Kingdom, but I really do think hard levers aren't thinking about consequences here. And I'm getting a little bit tired of their arrogance and thinking they're the only ones allowed an opinion. That's how I see it right now. I certainly don't envy Theresa May's job because she can't win if she goes for the hard line approach. Um, Remainers will say that she's caved in to the likes of Nigel Farage, but if she doesn't deliver something soon, then she's being dismissed as weak and not delivering the will of the people, which I think is an overused, I think it's a very problematic term. 17 million people voted to leave the European Union. 17 million people did not vote for a hard Brexit. And there is a difference.